Good morning, friends. Today, we are going to talk about the relationship of the head and the spine and what that has to do with singing. So, I found a lot of fantastic pictures online, which I'll be sharing with you. As one of my favorite body mapping teachers, Bonnie Drana, says, some of you will remember she was here 2 years ago at UAB to give us some really useful information. But Bonnie Drana says we need to paper the world with anatomical truth. So I'm going to give you lots of pictures today while I'm talking to you about the relationship between the head and the spine. And I found this one on a chiropractic website, and I just thought it was so telling because if you were to just look at the spine itself, you would think, oh my gosh, this guy is having some serious problems. But when you look at the rendering of the 3D body around the spine, we know a lot of people who look like that and stand like that. And so it's not hard to imagine that many of us have some version of this sort of compressing and leaning forward that is outside of neutral alignment in the spine and will make things really difficult for us to achieve sort of optimum physical results for peak performance. So I love this 3D version that shows us the depth of the spine inside the body. So again, the spine is in the back of your body and has several innate curves that we want to preserve and just basically not mess with. You don't have to do anything to curve your spine more unless you're kind of in some sort of problematic thing here. But if we allow the natural curvature of the spine to go where it goes and not interfere with it, it is going to sort of curve out in the upper back and then curve forward again in the cervical spine. So these 7 vertebrae are your cervical spine, and that is where your head balances when we leave it alone. So those of you who know me and have been studying with me for a little while, we've talked a lot about where the head balances on top of the spine. A lot of us think that our spine ends here in the top of the back or here at the base of the skull. But as you can see, the part of the base of your skull where you can touch is way on the outside of your body, and the spine is much, much deeper than that. So there's a lot of protective tissue and musculature and things like that, that if we're not interfering with the natural alignment of the head, will make it really difficult for us to sort of touch the top vertebra. Because you can see here, the bulbous part of your skull hangs over the back. So I'm going to show you some more pictures. We're sort of looking at the whole thing here, and now we're going to break it down into little pieces. I love this view of the skeleton from the back because you can see just how wide those cervical vertebrae are. These are the bones that hold up your head. Many of us think that our muscles are supposed to do that, but bones are what hold you up. And just taking a second to experiment with that may change some things for you. So the first thing I want to do is give you that experience. So imagine for a second that your muscles are holding up your big old head. And we've all heard all kinds of stories about how much your head weighs and how much it could weigh and how much it weighs when you're reading your cell phone. So imagine right now that your neck muscles are holding up all of that weight. Just feel how that feels in your body. And then give yourself to be aware of the truth that your bones hold up your head. These really thick, tightly connected vertebrae are the ones that hold up your head. The bones do it. Muscles don't have to. So again, this picture gives us a little bit of a sense. We're looking at the back of the skeleton here. Here's the pelvis and the hip bones. These beautiful ribs, floating shoulder blades or scapulae, and this big, strong spine that goes all the way from tailbone to the middle of your skull. Here's a close-up view of the back of the head, and you can see this kind of horseshoe-shaped bone that's basically situated behind the jaw. So again, we're at the back of the skeleton. Again, look how thick these vertebrae are that hold up your head. This top one here with the notch on it is called the axis. And then right above that, this horseshoe-shaped bone is the atlas. So axis and then atlas. The atlas is sometimes called the nodding joint, and it's a gliding joint. So the head is designed, the skull is designed to sort of rock back and forth on that atlas. And that's where our head movement comes from. So if you give yourself a minute to sort of think of, okay, here's my jaw, and high up behind that is my atlas, and that's where I nod from. I can nod yes, I can nod no, and let my head bobble. Your head is designed to constantly be in motion and help you readjust to your surroundings. If you've ever stood on one foot, the standing foot will constantly be readjusting as you sort of search for your balance on the floor. That is the same thing your head is designed to do on top of your spine, albeit in much tinier movements. So our main job is to just leave the head alone and let it move the way it's designed to move. One of the things I've been experimenting with for a number of years is just imagining this top joint a little bit higher in the skull, almost between my ears, and kind of giving myself the freedom to imagine that the center of movement is way up here. Because like most people, I tend to carry a lot of my stress in my neck and in my shoulders. We'll see more about why that is in a minute, but any sort of downward pressure or forward pressure in the spine is going to create neck pain because basically we're out of alignment there. So I would say one of the smallest things you can do to start to implement this new awareness is to give your head a little bubble very randomly while you're singing, when you're doing your exercises, when you're learning new music. The Alexander Technique teacher, Kathy Madden, talks about our learning posture. And a lot of us have developed these ideas that when we learn, we've got to be sort of scrunched down and like thinking very hard. And what happens then is that posture, that compromised posture, gets ingrained into your learning process. And then it becomes a thing that you have to undo at a later time. And so what we're hoping for is to create ease and freedom before learning even starts, so that our whole body and whole body freedom is included in the way that we learn things. Here we have another sideways view. We're kind of turning around toward the front. But again, you can see that the spine is long from the top of the ribs to the bottom of the skull. And again, this forward curve that we've been talking about. Here again, we have another like anatomically correct version looking directly from the side. And it's a little bit easier to see here in the detail, the curve in the spine and the protuberance of the skull behind. So if you think of the spine as sort of being in the middle of your skull, and the back half is, you know, your occiput and this whole bone structure, and the front half is the mandible and all the face stuff. So I've got some 3D people here to show you. Again, looking at the depth of the placement of the spine and the size, the kind of surprising size of these cervical vertebrae. Some Alexander Technique teachers as an exercise will have you draw your skeleton. And the first time I had to do that, I basically drew my spine as a piece of spaghetti, uncooked spaghetti, one long skinny thing that held me up. But in fact, it's pretty massive and does a lot of work and is designed for maximum movement and flexibility. Here's another internal view, just looking at the, again, how far away the collarbone is here, how much length we have available in the cervical spine. The hyoid bone here, fun fact, is attached to your larynx. So if you could see this person's tongue, it would go here from the bottom teeth all the way down the throat, and the tongue connects to the hyoid bone on the top, and then the larynx comes down from the bottom. So again, you can imagine if this person were scrunched down in any way, they'd then be creating downward pressure on the larynx, which is where singing sounds come from, and probably compromising breathing as well, because we've got a number of breathing structures here and muscles that cooperate with respiration. And if any of those are bearing extra stress, then breathing will be more difficult as well. Again, one more view. Look at that curve. And in the front here, this is where your singing stuff will be. And here's this atlas where you can nod from. Here's the back of your head. So much back of head. And just a couple more views so that you can sort of take all this in. Before we get to this guy, I want to just check in with you and do a little exercise. So put your hands here on your collarbone and just give yourself a few breaths. Yeah, and let everything move that's designed to move, because the ribs are designed to cooperate with breathing, because in there are your lungs, which are the things that fill up with air as you breathe in. And so we can try to, on purpose, adopt a little bit of this kind of turtle-y structure. So if you press down here on your ribs and then reach forward with your head, like we saw in some of the pictures, try to breathe here and just notice how that feels. For me, I can tell right away that I'm only breathing right here. I have no access to anything below my ribs at all. And we know that a complete breath will go all the way down to the pelvis and really engage every anatomical structure from basically your eyeballs to your hip bones and maybe some other stuff too. So again, this connection to posture is not just about, oh, we want you to stand up, don't slouch, whatever. It's really about getting the most out of your instrument, which happens to live inside of your body. And so every little adjustment that we make inside the body can have a positive impact on sound. The other thing I want you to explore right now is see if you can put your hand, any hand, on the back of your skull. And just kind of feel, we just looked at a bunch of pictures of skulls and what they really look like, and just kind of feel all of that sort of roundness and that spherical stuff and experiment with how much weight you can put back into your hands. And again, remembering that the muscles aren't required to hold up the neck, the bones do that. And that spinal structure is designed for all kinds of flexibility in every kind of direction. So as long as we're not interfering with that movement, the spine can do all sorts of things, and in fact is designed to do just that. As we inhale and ribs expand, the spine actually contracts just the tiniest bit and uses the discs, those little squishy things in between your vertebrae, to sort of absorb that movement. So the spine sort of compresses as we breathe in, and as we exhale, it lengthens back out again. So very subtly, there's kind of this gathering and lengthening that's happening every time you take a breath, if you let it. In the name of science, let's also do a little bit of a crunch. So press down on your head and see if you can really feel that tension transfer into your neck. Some of you might recognize this feeling right away. This is a pretty exaggerated version, but I know every time I'm in an airport and I'm carrying my heavy backpack, and half the time when I park my car, like over by the School of Education, and I have to walk to Halsey, I'm doing a little bit of this compression. And so I have to remind myself that my spine is designed to lengthen on the exhale, that my bones hold me up, my muscles don't need to do that, and that my skull is behind my spine. I spent a long, long time trying to be the girl in choir with great posture. And so I did some version of this for myself, where I was pulling my head back and actually almost flattening the back of my spine because I thought that that's what I was supposed to do and to create that length. But in fact, the length exists on its own. And what I really need to do is let the curve in my spine be curvy, kind of allow myself to consider this top third of my head is what moves, and that also my whole body responds to movement. So one of my learning posture things is, and you might see me do this with you in the studio as well, is that I lean to you and then I sort of accidentally lock my head there while I'm listening to you. And I feel like for some reason I have to be completely still and locked in place to prove that I'm really listening. So it's just a funny habit that I've developed over time. And what I need to sort of pay attention to is, when am I doing that? And can I remind myself of something useful and make a different choice? Really, if I turn my head, my shoulders want to go with me. And in fact, that movement will go all the way down to my left hip that is making contact with the couch. So if I turn, my whole body wants to respond. And so there's something about just turning my head that creates a lot of tension, because now I'm asking all of these muscles to do something that my whole body is designed to respond to. And also for actors, this is a huge deal, because when we're talking to people, we want to turn to them in a way that is actually natural and not just like stage directions, right? So it's not just like she turns to Brian and says, blah, blah, blah. If I only turn this way and I'm really rigid, I'm not actually allowing my body to respond to Brian. And I'm certainly not thinking about how my character's body would respond in that moment. Is my character a person who's defined by emotional and physical freedom? Or is my character a person who would have some restraint in some way? Then I'm making a choice about who this person is, as opposed to, this is my body, this is all it can do, I can only do this, is the only way I know how to do it. So discovering our habits is also a key to expressive freedom, because then we're free to notice our own patterns and put on the patterns of a character as a choice. I just have a couple more pictures to show you. Thinking again about sort of the whole body and how all of these things relate. So again, this sort of 3D view, zooming back out again, I love how clearly we can see the ribs. And now, of course, this is like a like animated rendering, but the anatomical information is good. Again, you can see the processes. That's what these sort of like bony wings are called on the vertebrae. And you can see them so thick and really supportive of the head all the way up to here. And again, right in the middle here will be where your singing stuff is. And just super zoomed in on all of that stuff. And so if you can imagine all of these places where you see sort of like no bones, that's all muscle stuff. And so many of you have talked to me about neck tension and neck pain, and that's something that I live with too, and that I am constantly thinking about and addressing. I'll tell you that one of my first instincts was like, oh, I just have to like pull my head, like stretch it out and get it loose and all that stuff. But what I was doing was just kind of initiating another form of tension. So the antidote to tension, I think, is movement. So finding a little bit of time every time you're in the practice room this week to give your head a little bubble. Anytime you're in a class or a workshop, or you're about to get up and read some dialogue or sing in class, You can give yourself a little wiggle and remind yourself that the head is designed to move. The whole torso is designed to respond to breath. So when we feel locked up and stuck, the antidote is free movement. And we'll be exploring that in lots of different ways this semester. So have fun incorporating this into your singing this week, and we'll talk all about it in the studio.